Hello and welcome back to another Walking Dead video. Today I will be talking about the Walking Dead Dead City and the Walking Dead Daryl Dixon and comparing them to see which is the better spin-off. Now that Daryl Dixon is over, we have the entire season of both seasons. It is time to see which spin-off is actually worth your time if you could only watch one of them. To help make this decision on which is the better spin-off, I'll be ranking each show against a handful of categories. Category 1 is about the characters. Which show has the most interesting characters? Category 2 is about the locations, the sets, the cinematography. Category 3 is about the story of each first season. Category 4 will be a uniqueness. How unique is this spin-off show to The Walking Dead and all the other shows out there? And my final category is this show actually moving the story forwards, or is it just a cash grab? So with our categories defined, let's jump into category number 1. Which show has the better characters? And looking at Dead City Season 1 and Daryl Dixon Season 1, it would have to easily be Daryl Dixon, because you actually care about the new characters introduced to this Walking Dead universe. You care about Isabel, you care about LaRon. The only weakest link there is probably Sylvie, who really does nothing. Over at Dead City and all the extended cast, you really don't care about. You might care a little about Pearlie, but there is no one else. You can have multiple characters that you like on Daryl Dixon, but if you're not counting Maggie and Negan, the only character there is really Pearlie, and I'm a bit with the Croat being a villain. He's just a massive retcon, that's what I see him as, and I definitely think Madame Genet and Coach Ron are a more interesting character. If we're just talking about the big spin-off characters, Daryl, Maggie and Negan, in Dead City, the only good one's Negan. Maggie feels absolutely pointless in the story, and it should just be the Negan show, and she does definitely kind of be there a lot of the time. And this just makes it more stronger for a case that Daryl Dixon wins this category and has the better characters. Now moving on to category 2, the locations and the cinematography. And this is quite a bit harder because we get France, where we get to see Paris, different cities. We actually get to see a lot of different locations in France, or we get to see New York. It is very hard because these are both very cool looking shows. I would have to say I don't have really anything negative about Daryl Dixon other than he might spend an episode or two in the generic woods, but we get to see castles, so that kind of makes up for it. But over at Dead City, I had a common issue with many of the episodes in my reviews that I felt like it was too dark and I didn't like the weird kind of blue neon light a lot of the time. I had a complaint about the visual effects of Dead City. In almost all my reviews, they're always tiny. So, even though I think the city is such a cool aspect, I would have to give this to Daryl Dixon because I didn't have any of those common little nitpicks with this cinematography. We got to see some cool parts of New York, but we didn't get to see any iconic places. We didn't get to see Times Square. We didn't get to even see, you know, the Statue of Liberty. In Daryl Dixon, Daryl just kind of goes for a tour around Paris. He sees the Eiffel Tower, the small Statue of Liberty, or the original one. He actually sees the Notre Dame, and he goes to the catacombs. We get to see some very cool, iconic, Paris locations in Daryl Dixon. And sadly, we don't get to see any of that for Maggie and Negan. It's just kind of generic parts of New York. There's no big iconic moments. I do have to say, the world building in Daryl Dixon also does feel better. I was really not a fan of this random state that kind of popped up in Dead City with New Babylon and the Marshals and this law, and it just didn't really work as well as Daryl Dixon with the nightclub in Paris and Paris still being alive. I just felt Daryl Dixon worked better with building a fleshed out universe, whereas Dead City kind of just plopped in this community that's apparently massive and has law enforcement that we never heard of, and I just felt like, how do we have this big community that the Commonwealth wasn't aware of, or CRM wasn't aware of? It just felt very weird and very tacked on, where Daryl Dixon, the world building, was kind of weaving through the plot and not just kind of there for later seasons. So, for category 2, Daryl Dixon wins again, but barely. Moving on to category 3 is the story, and this is quite a hard one because both of them have really good stories. However, I would have to say Daryl Dixon is a lot like The Last of Us' story. It is just Daryl in France with a special child trying to travel north of him. that is basically The Last of Us, with a few changes here and there. But then over at Dead City, you have Maggie and Negan having to reluctantly team up to go and save Herschel in Manhattan from this retroactively, like, kind of shoved in villain from Negan's past. I would have to say both stories have their ups and downs, but I feel like the story in Daryl Dixon is better paced. In Dead City, there's a point where I feel like the story kind of stops a little so that the characters can just kind of chill a little, and I feel like the story in Dead City was more predictable, and the whole twist of Maggie I didn't like. There are big moments in the plot of Dead City I did not like. It is still a very interesting story, and Negan is absolutely phenomenal. But then you add that thing with Maggie, which makes the story a bit clunkier, and I could have definitely, like, seen, you could have rewritten Dead City and made it a lot tighter and better story, and so that's why Daryl Dixon has to win. It just doesn't have the negatives Dead City does. I'm not saying Dead City's story is bad, but I feel like Dead City has some negatives which do bring it down slightly, which then gives Daryl Dixon's story the edge, because you do get a very nice, compact 6-episode story in Daryl Dixon. Moving on to category 4, and this is about just how unique the show is. And both shows do have standout moments, and they both have things that are very different. And Daryl Dixon has variants, France, and all that aspects, which Dead City didn't have. Like, the variants we thought there would be in Dead City, no, we got to see a Walker King. So I was very disappointed with that. Like, we just had the variants at the end of World Beyond, at the end of The Walking Dead. Dead City comes out, not a single variant in sight other than the Walker King. Daryl Dixon leans into that, which does give it some points and makes it more interesting, makes it feel more fresh. But then you then have it still feeling like The Last of Us, and at times it just feels like a cheaper version of it, but in France. And Daryl Dixon isn't very unique with its story. It is a very common trope at the moment in Hollywood, where you have an older character find a child that isn't his, and has to travel across said location, and ends up bonding with the character along the way. That's a very popular thing right now, and it just makes Daryl Dixon fall into that crowd, and it is just not very unique with the ideas it does, because there's only so much variation you can do with that basic story. Whereas Dead City just kind of stands out a bit more. It tells its own story and doesn't really have a copycat, or is really a copycat. Dead City also tries some more unique things, and in the Walking Dead franchise itself, it definitely looks the most unique and has the most kind of unique aspect. And it definitely does help that they did such a big time jump after the end of The Walking Dead, so you could see especially Negan in a very different way in his life. And we're not going to talk about Maggie, but Negan definitely is very different in the show, and it definitely does help make the show feel so much different to what has come before. So because of that, I'm gonna have to give this one to Dead City, but barely. I just feel like Daryl Dixon feels a bit more like The Walking Dead. It might do some very unique things, but it is very safe at some aspects, where Dead City is kind of throwing everything at the wall, I feel like, at times, and seeing what sticks. Some things I might absolutely hate, but some things do work. Now, category 5. Which show feels like a natural continuation, and which one is definitely a cash grab? And this is, hands down, Dead City is a cash grab. Maggie and Negan's story felt done at the end of The Walking Dead. You could have left those characters there and it would have been perfect. Dead City feels like they're like, these two characters are very popular, give them a spin-off, set it about 5 years in the future, and it will make no sense at all. You have Negan have some random character progression, but Maggie, no, she's going to have zero character progression for about 16 years, because Glenn dies about 2 years into the apocalypse. Maggie hasn't changed in almost 2 decades, so we're going to have that Maggie still. That really does suck. And it really does ruin the ending of The Walking Dead slightly, where you have Daryl Dixon, but the way he ends in The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon TV show feels like a natural continuation of his story, and it just feels like this is where Daryl would have ended up. It works for the universe. I just feel like Dead City is just straight up a cash grab, and Maggie and Negan shouldn't have made it out of the final season, and we should have just said goodbye to them then. So Daryl Dixon wins this category, and that is my kind of video. So in my opinion, Daryl Dixon is clearly the better spin-off. This is no shade on Dead City. It is still a great spin-off and way better than all the other spin-offs. Like Dead City and Daryl Dixon, They're up there in the second and third place of best Walking Dead shows in the entire franchise. So please tell me down below, which show do you think is better? I personally think Daryl Dixon is the stronger of the two shows, but if you think Dead City is better, please tell me down in the comments why you think so. I'd really like to know which show you think is better. And if you want, you can use my 5 categories to rank Daryl Dixon and Dead City in your opinion. But that's it for me today, so goodbye, peace out, and I'll see you in my next video.